Hello, Ann.
Hello, Glenn.
How are you doing?
I'm doing just great out here in Madison, Wisconsin, in the middle of May. It's a beautiful day here.
Ann Althouse. You want to introduce yourself? I'm so glad to be talking with you.
I'm so glad to be talking with you.
Thank you.
I'm Ann Althouse at the University of Wisconsin Law School and the blog Althouse.
And I am Glenn Loury of Brown University and host of The Glenn Show at blogginghead.tv. I get so much pleasure out of saying that, Ann. So it's good to be talking with you again in this political season. And let me see now, we've got an agenda. We're going to talk about gay marriage politics. We're going to talk about private equity politics. We're going to talk about how you do and do not talk about race in this country. And then we're going to talk maybe a little bit about what academics do travel-wise during our summers. So why don't we get started hold on just a minute. Can't talk to you now? Bye. Why don't we get started? Okay. So, well, very much in the news recently has been President Obama's dramatic and historic, quote-unquote, pronouncement that he's finished evolving in his views on gay marriage and that he's in favor of it. And it was such an interesting event to me on many levels, one being the fact that it appears the president was himself outed, if you'll pardon the expression, by his vice president, who went on national television to say that he had no problem with same-sex marriage, and the president was forced to take it. View, but then there's also the question of what the political consequences of this would be. And I know you've been following this closely, so what's your take, Ann? I'm curious.
Well, first of all, I question whether it wasn't all set up. And some people say Biden, you couldn't really have a plan and set it up with Biden accidentally on purpose saying that, because Biden is so gaffe-prone that you wouldn't trust him as the person to do that. But I put up a poll on my blog and asked people, and I floated the theory, well, maybe it was a fake gaffe, and that he really meant to do it, and it was creating an occasion so Obama could do this, that Obama had political reasons for wanting to do this, apparently, I think, tied to fundraising, that he had some people holding out on him, and it needed to happen.
I've heard that, yeah.
But I put up a little poll, and I was guest blogging over at Instapundit, too, so I got a particularly large number of respondents, and I think it was over 80% of the people thought it was a fake gaffe and that it was done on purpose. So that is so cynical.
Really, I mean, nothing happens without there being some kind of crass, and devious political calculation behind it. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you. Certainly, it could have been fake, but I mean, if that's 80% of the people suspect that says something, I think, about how cynical we've become.
Well, wasn't there a poll that came out yesterday? I think it was a Gallup poll saying I think 62% of Americans think that Obama made the announcement for political reasons.
I saw that. I think it may have even been like 67, but yeah, it was over 60% that thought it was a political calculation. But that's different from sending the vice president out to pretend to commit a gaffe so that you could pretend to be chastising him and angry with him for having said so, and pretend to having been driven by political, exigency to make an announcement that you want to make because of the calculated political benefit from making it, and you're trying to minimize the blowback political cost of having made the announcement by having it seem to be nothing of your own discretion but something forced on you by events. I mean, that's devious.
Why would he want to look passive? I think Obama already has a little bit of a tendency to seem passive and run by other people. I was going back to his Dreams from My Father book the other day just because I got involved in this topic of bullying because Romney was accused of cutting some boy's hair when he was a teenager.
Yes, I saw that.
Some of us went back and found an incident in Obama's book where he had bullied a little girl and been goaded by some people.
I hadn't heard about that.
I think, Romney, I thought it was interesting. Romney was the leader bullying the kid, but Obama was the follower. He was bullied by other kids into bullying the lone black girl in the class. And so, I started examining some other things in the book, and I think that there is a kind of a passivity to Obama that I don't think he would want to enhance.
Oh, by making it seem as though his hand was forced by. But what about the substance of the question? The headlines, there were banner headlines all over the country. President of the United States, the first sitting president, to et cetera, et cetera. Is that overblown or what? I mean, does the fact that the president has taken a particular position on gay marriage have any real moral significance?
Yeah, I think it does. Yes. I mean, I wish the press, my immediate revulsion, to the extent that I feel it has to do with the press is so eager to find ways to extol Obama and to overpraise him. It's just gross. I mean, I wish the press would be more neutral and more objective and stuff like this. I think that lends more criticism to the press. But I think, yes, it does mean something that the president takes a stand on that. That he didn't do it before is kind of bad. But it was difficult to do. I mean, the majority of people are obviously against it, even when they're asked in polls. But when they have a chance to vote on something like whether to put the definition of marriage in the state constitution, they continually vote against gay marriage. So I think that it's a real. I mean, you know that American people don't really support it. I don't know, but it is some leadership to say that he supports it. But I feel like he was lying before. I mean, everybody knew he was lying before, didn't they? It was just a question of what he was going to say out loud. So now he's finally said it out loud because it's expedient for him to say it out loud. But it's still something.
This fascinates me, this issue of where we know, that is, you say he was lying, and I think lying is a strong word. I agree with you that he was dissembling, that he was not being transparent, that he didn't say what he believed. And I'm not trying to defend him here at all. I just think it's somehow more interesting than lying. It's more interesting than lying. Because what it is it's like winking. It's like everybody knows that you think something, and they know that you can't say that you think it. Okay? Mm-hmm. So they allow you to say that, well, you don't really think it, while continuing to believe that you do think it, in the interest of keeping you viable within some kind of, of diverse, multivalent, moral universe. So you don't have to take a stand, but everybody kind of believes that you have a stand, right? And then when you come out of the closet and finally do take the stand, it becomes, instead of an act of, cowardice and of dishonesty, it becomes an act of courage. Now, finally, he's able to affirm explicitly what we've all believed that he thought but couldn't say implicitly. And I find that to be a very interesting aspect of, public communication, political communications.
Right. Yeah, I know. Blogging really feeds off of that. Of course, politicians are not going to tell it straight. I mean, I use the word lying. I have a tag, lying. I mean, I like to use the straight talk of saying lying. I think it is lying. You could say, but it's lying of an inconsequential. Of course, they have to lie like that. You couldn't have a politician who didn't lie like that. So, of course, they do that. They all lie. Politicians lie. I think good American voters are always saying they're all liars, and I think it's really the norm to believe that and to be suspicious. And it's good citizenship to know that and to be aware of that and look for that. But I think in Obama's case particularly, there's always been a lot of questions of what does he really believe. For example, is he really a socialist, or is he really this or that religion, or what is he? Is he really a patriotic? So there are always all these questions about him and what does he really think. So I think there might be some Obama particular issues about dissembling and lying. Is there a real core? Is there really a real moral core to him? I mean, I noticed that John McWhorter just published an article in the New Republic about Obama and homophobia, and he said that you might be interested in this whole. Obama is helping with the problem of black homophobia, but the thing that I homed in on there was that. He said, for someone of Obama's demographic and biography, it was fake. It was more than a little fake for him to say that he didn't believe in gay marriage. In other words,
given his age and the social location from which he came and so on.
Yeah, and having gone to Harvard Law School, having hugged Derek Bell, he puts that in, that of course he would believe in gay marriage. And, I'm in that milieu, liberal law school. I know that it's the norm for everyone to be for it. And I've been for it ever since I first heard about it back in the 80s. I mean, it's just the norm.
So,
but does that mean that that's really it's something you really believe, or that you came from a background where everybody believes it, in order to be a decent person within that milieu, you're going to manifest that you believe it too, and then you go somewhere else and it's not the norm there, so you don't believe it there. What do you really believe?
Well, hold on a minute, Anna. You're going so fast. There's so much stuff on the table here. A couple of things I don't want to lose track of. One is there's lying and then there's bullshit. Do you know this book by the Princeton philosopher Harry Frankfurt?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
so lying is where, for strategic or self-interested reasons you tell a falsehood. Bullshit is where you exhibit a willful disregard or contempt for what's true or false. I mean, you have no interest. It's a lack of interest in the truth or falsity of the statements that you make. Bullshit is when you say things for the calculated effect that they will have without regard, a disinterest in the truth. And so, again, not to quibble, but just to say, I think what we're talking about here, and not only with President Obama, but I expect with any effective politician, is being mired in bullshit, which is to say being in a universe where every statement is calculated for its effect with less regard than perhaps we academics would like to the veracity or factual. You care about the truth only to the extent that you think somebody else is going to come behind you and say, well, what you just said was a falsehood, but not because you have an interest in the truth as such. Okay, so
well, it sounds like in that situation you're so mired, you're so in an environment of bullshit that you don't even know what the truth is. The truth is irrelevant because you're so in the game of bullshitting that there is no truth.
Well, here, as you've just said, the truth is virtual. That is, the truth about the president's stand on the substantive moral question of the legitimacy of gay marriage is virtual. We're all supposed to impute what he really believes from, as McWhorter had argued, his social location, his background, and his general orientation, and then give him leeway to say things that he knows not to be consistent with what he really believes because we're for him in some larger sense and recognize that this is a strategic imperative for him to do that. So, it's as I say, I think it's a really interesting, and I think it's also a very widely, observed. I mean, I think you see this all over the place. But I did not have a chance to look at yet McWhorter's piece in the New Republic. Say in a little bit more detail how it is that he credits, I gather, the president with combating specifically black homophobia, whatever that means. What is that, by the way?
Well, he says he was giving quiet succor to black homophobia by not coming out and saying he supports.
Oh, giving cover to black people who are against gay marriage to feel that they can do so without being somehow morally unfit. Is that the point?
Before people were able to say, well, the president isn't even for gay marriage, so he was being a role model and a leader with respect to withholding support for gay marriage, and now he's got a new role in the fight against black homophobia. And I just read it in a minute before going on here, but so I think that the idea is that he's a particularly strong role model with respect to black people, and black people are reputed to be homophobic, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, in the sense that blacks voted in the California and I guess in other state ballot initiatives on this issue in a way that was less friendly to the gay cause than they might have done or that might have been expected for them to do, given that blacks, too, had been victims of discrimination. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, and I've said this here, on Blogging Heads before, my son, Glenn II, is a gay man, and I have great, sympathy for and identification with, and I'm supportive of, and so forth and so on. That is, I
have a gay son as well, too. Did you know that?
No, I did not know that. So there we are. And I'm black, okay? But I'm not a homophobe, okay? I am not a homophobe. I say it, and perhaps the fact that I have to say it causes people to raise their eyebrows and to wonder, but especially given what I'm about to say. And that is, I'm not sure that opposition to gay marriage is an act of bigotry. That's what I'm about to say.
Right.
I'm not sure that the people who hold values for religious or other reasons that lead them to not want to elevate, or I should say acknowledge and respect, homosexual unions as being equivalent to and with them being indifferent about the homosexuality, who don't say yuck to themselves when they think about the sexual acts that people of same-sex engagement and so forth, for religious or cultural reasons. It's not clear to me that that's bigotry. Now, that is a very difficult thing for me to say, especially in the hearing of my son, who is quite convinced that it is bigotry. But what I'm struggling with is that, all right, it's clear, our views are evolving, that is, as a society about this issue. Certainly mine have evolved as an individual person. What do we owe to the people who are a little bit slow to move when the whole cultural center on an issue like this is moving? What do we owe to them as a deference or respect for their lagging view? I mean, because they are not at the forefront of what is a revolutionary shift in societal attitudes. They then are bigots. To me, the politics of that kind of, that's demagogic politics in my mind. I'm not that there aren't bigots out there, everybody, please. I understand that there are bigots and there's violence against gay people and the gay adolescents are committing suicide at high rates and everything. I understand that there are issues here, but I'm just saying, what do we owe to the people who are not yet quite on board, given that all of us are evolving to some degree? So anyway, that's my speech.
I think that's a really important point, and it has to do with political rhetoric in which we move quickly to the point of accusing other people of being hateful instead of keeping a kind of a civil zone where we can have differences of opinion without thinking that the other person is a bad person. In the war on women rhetoric of the last few months, there's been a lot of talk that, you know, you're sexist or you're fighting a war on women, you're against women, you're hateful toward women, simply if you don't want to pay for the birth control or something. I mean, let alone be opposed to abortion. I mean, I try to be respectful to people who have a whole range of opinions, including religious opinions based on scripture and so forth. That takes them to different political positions. I think if you're going to start saying you're hateful, you're a bigot if you think this, that's a big step to make. And if you want to persuade people, why are you pushing them away? You're trying to scare them and in a way drive them underground. That actually can drive them out of the marketplace of ideas and into the underground where people exchange true bigotry.
Right. Now, we agree 100%. And I want to say something else about this, which is that I think there's a kind of moral superficiality and lightweightedness in terms of ethical reflection and the kind of quick move to condemn people. For example, some of the people who oppose gay marriage equality on the basis of religious doctrine, to condemn them as morally unfit. I mean, you haven't really examined the question very deeply, it seems to me, if you haven't taken a pause to try to reflect upon the sort of deeply rooted cultural, religious, ethical, and so forth basis from which such expressions as may come out of the evangelical Christian tradition or may come out of the Catholic, tradition about these matters. I mean, these matters of human sexuality and the ethics of human sexuality are profoundly difficult questions. And I think about, you say the black homophobia, or McWhorter says black homophobia, and I think about these African-American ministers who I've been seeing on television of late, giving voice to this sentiment within the African-American. And I think about the church where my wife, who passed away some months ago, was buried. The church where my gay son was, brought as an infant and brought along in the church for years. That's a community of morally serious people who are struggling with some of the most difficult issues that we face. And they're using the cultural traditions that they've inherited that have evolved over generations and indeed over centuries. And to blow them off, okay? To just dismiss them with the back of one's hands as beneath contempt, bigots who don't even have to be met and argued with. That is a superficial intellectual and moral response, in my humble opinion. And again, this is without even touching the question of whether or not the state of Wisconsin or the state of Massachusetts ought or ought not to sanction marriage between people of the same sex. So,
people are using it as I noticed that the gay opinion writer, a vice columnist, Dan Savage, was at some high school or event recently where he started going from talking about gay acceptance and avoiding bullying of gay people to actually himself switching over to what people characterized as bullying, where he was telling people not to believe their religion, don't believe what you read in the Bible, and just getting really hostile on the subject. And I listen to his podcast a lot, Savage Love, which is he's a big opinion leader, especially among young people. He has a show on MTV now. And the message is so antagonistic to religion. Basically, religion is channeling this hate. And yet, for most people in the world, religion is their moral foundation. It's what they work off of. And to just say, reject it all, I don't know where people think that the people who are now grounded in religion, where those people are going to go, or how the average person is supposed to go forward morally without religion. Maybe some people can do that, but most people gravitate to religion and use religion as their source of moral values and ideas and inspiration to be good. I don't see the strategy even of getting rid of that, or why you would want to do that. Why that would be more important or less important than the goal of getting the label marriage for your relationship.
Okay, and I got to do this because I can imagine that you and I are agreeing, but somebody out there is going to be wanting to push back, and they're going to say something like, suppose someone said that they opposed interracial marriage for religious reasons, as people did say before Loving versus Virginia. What would you, Professor Loury or Professor Althouse, have to say about that? Do we give deference to those laggards in a time of cultural change in mid-20th century when the nation was reorienting its attitudes about black subordination and white supremacy? There were some people who were first and some people who were last, and the ones who were last were bigots, plain and simple. Why were they bigots in 1960 and not comparably persons being bigots today? And likewise, why are religious arguments in favor of the hierarchy of the races, which were trotted out for 200 years, obviously inappropriate and detract from the legitimacy of religion, whereas such arguments about sexuality today do not? So someone's going to be asking that question, and I thought I might make it explicit here for us to respond to.
Well, I think as far as opposing slavery and supporting civil rights, I think that the upswelling of public feeling there was very much grounded in religion. So religion deserves credit. You get some good and some bad coming out of religion, but people getting into the frame of mind where they think about larger values and they think about God or whatever, they are able to open up and change from embedded traditional things that don't represent good values. I think religion helps them find a way out of that. It can hold them back as well, but I just think you need to work within religion and not just and not demonize people's religion, because anti-religion is a kind of bigotry too. If you want to look at what people have killed each other the most over the years in terms of bigotry, it's been religion.
Okay, that's good, because my response to my hypothetical pushback would have been along similar lines. It would have been that religion is a resource that a society can exploit in order to modulate what otherwise might be seriously conflictual, periods of social evolution. And while the teachings, the particular doctrinal teachings, may or may not be consistent with our latter-day assessments, the cultural tradition and the resources of tolerance and accommodation and modesty and humility and reverence and this kind of thing that are available within religious traditions are ultimately the only way that we can manage these kinds of transitions in a commodious and effective way without conflict and undue disruption. And that leads me to say that yes, in the mid-20th century, when ideas were changing about race, we did owe something to the laggard, racist, bigoted, quote-unquote, person who wasn't right up to date with the latter-day change. We owed at least a civil engagement with that person in an effort to try to reason with them and persuade them of the imperative of this transition, rather than a demonizing and polarizing kind of demagogic and stereotyping rhetoric, which is like it's the path of sort of the easy way to go in these conversations, something like that.
Yeah, if you start to tell people, you're bad, your ideas are rejected in decent society, you need to feel guilty, and you need to be scared that we're going to hurt you because you haven't lived up to our standards. We drive you into a kind of rebellious outsider position. I think that that's all very dangerous, and I don't think people should be embracing something like gay rights because they're afraid that other people will reject them or that something bad will happen to their business, they're going to get boycotted or something like that. I think that that's a very, is that what you really want? If your value really is good and all people are equal and you want that to be seen and valued and recognized, why would you want to scare people into that? Why don't you believe you can persuade them?
Yeah. So, What do you think about the recent political attacks on Republican candidate Mitt Romney because of his background in private equity? The Obama campaign last week, if I'm not mistaken, released a new ad that's running in some of the battleground states that, highlights the fact that Romney's private equity firm, Bain Capital, and some of their transactions led to some people losing their jobs. And he's depicted as a guy who, doesn't care about, he's a bully in the capital market, just like he's a bully in the high school corridor, and so on. Is that an example of rhetoric over the top in the service of political ambition, of a demonization of one's political enemies, of a simplification and sort of morally stick-figured engagement with what's really a subtle and difficult set of, trade-offs and conflicts that we confront?
It's
not to put words in your mouth.
It's not what you want me to say. I think it's really troubling that so much of how people decide how to vote is done at an emotional level, and that is how the mind works, and sending out these signals about suffering and people who are hurting and people who don't care, and maybe the candidate isn't truly human but some sort of a robot. These kinds of intuitive sparks that are sent into our brains and that tweak us in one direction or another. That's got to happen. I mean, that's advertising. That's the way politics works. But that's really what we are. And if economics really is the most important issue, and I think everybody probably would agree that it is, but yet we don't understand it. We don't really try to educate ourselves. The candidates don't seem to try. They just seem to engage in this emotional tweaking of our brains. I mean, I wish Romney would step up and in some elegant, articulate way educate people about how capitalism works, how competition works, whatever these economic issues are, and explain why what he did was good and the way things need to be in our society in a way that Americans will agree with. And I think most Americans really do support capitalism and free markets and do understand something about economics. But I feel like Obama's ad is kind of pulling us in the direction of sort of dumb emotion, of just saying, oh no, people are hurting. And I've experienced this in Wisconsin for the past year and a half over this stuff with our Governor Scott Walker and the efforts to
recall him,
to reform the budget here, and he's done certain things. He's been demonized, and there's all of this hatred of him as if he's just some kind of a corporate puppet, and he's not. He's a devil. I mean, he's openly portrayed as Hitler and things of that sort. And then the people on the other side are just people who care about people, and then we're supposed to vote on that instead of. But everybody knows the economy is serious. I just feel like we're just on a knife's edge of either falling over into unknowingness and stupidity, or actually facing up to the reality of what we're supposed to understand and try to understand it. But I know that elections have to work on emotion. So that's what troubles me.
Well, that's the thing. Elections have to work on emotion. And look, I'm a professional economist, and I know. You look at Spain, where they have a 25% unemployment rate. I'm heard in a 50% youth unemployment rate. In a world where nobody can be fired from their job, that's where you end up. Okay, you end up with anybody who has a job being great, and anybody who doesn't have a job having a hard time finding one, because when companies face all of that, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to go off into a right-wing sort of libertarian economic speech here, but it's true. It's just true. If you insist that no one ever lose their current condition of employment, you ossify the economy and the labor market. You create a circumstance where down the line, very few people are going to be able to find satisfactory employment. It's just, private equity, and I'm sure they have, stuff to be, apologetic about, and stuff that would not be all that flattering. But basically, this idea that you're going to come in and reorganize because the existing constellation of assets is not able to be deployed in a way that makes a profit, okay? You're going to come in, you're going to rationalize, you're going to bring your business expertise, you're going to trim down, you're going to reorganize, you're going to restructure. Some stuff's going to be sold off, some stuff's going to change. What's going to be preserved is adapted to current market conditions in such a way that it can be viable going forward. This is an obviously necessary activity in a world that's subject to constant change. Okay? You have to reorganize assets. You have to come in and restructure, and you have to do things in a world that's subject to economic change, to shifting markets, to globalization, to technological advancement. Okay?
Do you think
so this is necessary. This is necessary activity.
Right.
And therefore, the demonization of somebody who engages in it purely because they engaged in it, purely because you could point to an anecdotal incident of it having had an ill effect, without any effort to engage in a broadly, systematic assessment of the activity, that's just demagoguery, in my opinion, whether it's practiced by a Democrat or a Republican.
What do you think Romney will be able to say that to people in a comprehensible way, or do you think people kind of actually know it?
I don't think people know it. I don't think people know it. I mean, I think the rhetoric of politics is very, very superficial. I think this idea of shipping jobs overseas. Okay? Mm-hmm. I mean, when I was a kid, when I was in my early 20s, I worked in a printing plant on the south of the loop shore of Chicago called the R.R. Donnelly and Sons Printing Company. And they had like a dozen buildings strung out all along the lakefront there, and they printed Time magazine and Life magazine, and they printed telephone books and the Sears catalog, and they did all kinds of other stuff. It was a huge enterprise. Okay, it doesn't exist anymore, partly because of technical change, and partly because a lot of that work went offshore. It went to the south, and it went offshore. It just doesn't exist anymore. Okay? The idea that the management of some economic enterprise would seek the lowest cost producers of the things that they need to produce in a global environment, and that is somehow an act of an unpatriotic act, or an act of an economic crime, an act for which people need to be pilloried and so forth. I mean, this is just illiteracy. This is just a kind of failure to understand the mechanisms, how the mechanisms actually work. So, no, I don't think the task that Romney faces of defending himself against this demagogic assault is an easy one at all, because I don't think the public understands well enough the kind of complex foundation on which their own prosperity rests. And I think it lends itself to easy caricature and, easy stereotyping. So I don't know. I mean... Yeah. I'm not a Romney guy, so it's not my problem to try to figure out how he should give this speech. But I am a more or less astute observer of the scene, and it depresses me that our politics is so easily hijacked by this kind of pandering, and is so impervious to a kind of a reasoned assessment of what we know about real cause and effect in the world.
Did you see there was a Rasmussen poll that came out, I think, yesterday, that people trust, 51% of likely voters trust Romney more on the economy, 39% trust the president more. And there were like 5 trust issues that Rasmussen polled on, and on all of them Romney came out ahead. But I thought it was interesting that people already trust Romney more on the economy, so maybe people are willing to defer to business expertise or to just hold Obama responsible for what's happened in the economy. None of that is horribly rational either.
Well, the president is the incumbent. The economy is in the doldrums, and despite his effort to blame it on the previous administration, 3.5 years is a long time. So it can't be surprising that the president's trust on the economy numbers are in the toilet. I mean, the circumstance is what it is. But I think the implication of what you say is right, which is that they're going to, that is the Obama campaign, have a heck of a hard time painting Mitt Romney as some, nefarious, Darth Vader-like, dangerous, wild-eyed, extremist person. They're going to have a hard time painting him as, George W. Bush or something like that, reincarnated. I don't know. That does seem to be the strategy coming out of the gate, but it doesn't look to me like it's got a chance of working against Mitt Romney.
Now, the Obama people must have thought the Occupy Wall Street movement was going to pick up steam and do some of their work for them and create a kind of a public emotional climate around which people would be against anyone associated with business like Romney.
Romney and his friends and his millionaire friends, right?
Yeah, right. But what happened to Occupy Wall Street? It seems to me to completely have ended, didn't it? Or it turned into something that the Democrats wouldn't want to be associated with anyway. So the whole effort to create this anti-business sort of revolutionary climate in the country really failed, didn't it?
Well, it has petered. I mean, wintertime came, and so, street demonstrations became a little bit less, desirable to participate in and less viable. We're getting back to summertime, and maybe they'll be able to stir something up. There is not, however, I mean, when you say Occupy Wall Street, I always think about the other bookend, which is Tea Party. And
Tea Party's doing well.
The Tea Party's doing very well. The political scientist at Harvard, Theda Skocpol, and one of her associates has just published a book on the Tea Party based on some pretty extensive research, and I've had the opportunity to read it. And the Tea Party is, according to this carefully researched, assessment of the sort of political viability and the structure and the composition and the ideology and the impact on a local and national election and so forth of the Tea Party that the Harvard political scientist Theda Skocpol has undertaken. They are here to stay. They're having a major impact on the Republican Party. They've already had a major impact on the shape of the House of Representatives. And they're dug in, and they're very. And so there was nothing like that degree of organization, of sort of solid networking, of a kind of coherent structure to Occupy Wall Street. It had a spontaneity. In fact, they're part of the ideology of this so-called Occupy movement is a leaderless, spontaneous, sort of anti-establishmentarian ethos. So I don't know what will come of the sentiment, but I don't see a movement, at least not yet.
I think the ultimate ideology was too close to really left-wing politics or anarchy, whereas Tea Party was very much about getting back to the originalist values, and there was a constitutional foundation. It was actually, so it had this control on it that didn't go well, that actually made people feel that they were getting back to what they always believed in, that the government had gotten out away from them with respect to.
But,
and then it naturally got embedded in real political campaigns, like this thing with Murdoch in Indiana. And just yesterday, this character, Deb Fisher, who had been endorsed by Sarah Palin, came from nowhere to get the GOP nomination for senator.
Well,
and will probably be the senator, because Bob Kerry's not going to win, is he?
Yeah. Well, they're not. I think the thing is that Occupy Wall Street is more of a kind of sentiment or a feeling, and it's atmospherics, and it engenders some kind of spontaneous activity, but it's not a movement rooted and organized in a way that can have long-lasting political effect, at least not yet. Whereas the Tea Party is precisely that, a movement that's organized and dug in a way that it can have long-lasting effect. But I do want to say, again, anticipating the pushback that could be out there, that the idea of the 1% versus the 99% does seem to me to be a both legitimate and viable sentiment around which some kind of politics might be organized. That is to say, this feeling that what went down in 2007, 2008, 2009 with the financial crisis and the bailing out of the banks and the rescue, the mobilization of federal resources and political attention to the saving of financial institutions and, the kind of rescuing them from their own greed and incompetence, was a major power move in the society. I mean, it laid bare the underlying structure of hierarchy and power in the society, which is a real thing. The idea that you're against that you're saying, oh, you can bail out the big banks, but you can't, mobilize yourself in order to help real people in the middle of the country, people who are struggling at the bottom of the income distribution or whatever. People with power have access; they buy access to the political inner sanctum, but the demos, the kind of heartland of the people don't have a voice. I mean, it seems to me that there is something in that egalitarian impulse, and that the problem is how to translate whatever that something is into viable institutions and organized activity that can have an effective impact on politics.
Well, as an economist, do you think the banks should have been bailed out? I saw a poll today that something like 71% of Americans think the banks should have been left to fail.
No. I don't. I am, not so radical as to think that we want to muck around with, serious depression-enhancing consequences of an absolute collapse of the financial system. I think once we had the run on the banks, and the prospect that there was going to be a meltdown financially, which would have, had tremendous, real, deleterious consequences in the lives of people, some kind of stabilization and rescue was necessary. My objection is they left with too much money still in their pockets, and left with too many of the same players still at the table, and left with the ideology of unfettered laissez-faire capitalism still much too much intact. I would have preferred to see a more muscular and, frankly, more kind of socialistic or nationalizing effort that would have wiped out equity holders, that would have, unseated corporate managements, and that would have had a more intrusive federal role in the necessary rescue activity, so as to transition in due course, as was done in the case of the banking crisis in Sweden, as far as I understand it, back into, a privatized and divested world. I don't want the government in the banking business forever, but I would have wanted to see equity holders take a much more, rigorous haircut than they took. And I would have also wanted to see more social opprobrium to these captains of industry who leave pretty much with not only their fortunes but also their public reputations intact. So, I don't know where that leads me, because I'm against demagoguery, and I expect that the only kind of leadership that would have induced such a environment of opprobrium would have been rife with anti-capitalist demagoguery. So I'm not sure that I'm not arguing at cross purposes with myself here. I don't want demagoguery, but I really did want the guys, men and women who brought us to that pass to take a rougher treatment than what they actually got.
Yeah, it's hard to get that exactly right, and there's such a complicated matter that you need to convince people of to go this far but not no farther. Yeah. It's hard to get people in exactly that zone. I don't know how you do that when you're talking about something so complicated that people just are never going to understand it.
Yeah.
I don't feel that I understand it.
It is complicated.
Okay,
yeah. Well, why don't we try to transition?
We have other topics.
We do have other topics. We have other topics. And I'd say we're 40 minutes into a conversation. Maybe we ought to be thinking about winding down.
Okay. Well, we have some topics we could have talked about, but and they were good ones. I'm missing this, but I think maybe we should go to our off ramp.
All right, yeah, because this does not have to be the last conversation we have.
Right.
And I got my own TV show at bloggingheads.tv,
Okay, part 2.
So I'll invite you back soon. But
Okay.
let's talk about what we're going to do with our time this summer, because I think there's some sort of interesting stuff going on. We're both academics. We get this kind of 3-month hiatus where we don't have to be fixed in one place, and we can still get our paycheck.
You work for a private university.
I do.
Correct? I work for the University of Wisconsin, and I'm kind of a public figure around here in Wisconsin where people are kind of a little bit out to get me for making as much money as I do, which is on the internet, and they always see that and they say, well, Althouse isn't working, but what they don't know, as they put my salary up on the newspaper website and constantly talk about me, this is what I get around here, because I'm not a liberal and I'm not with the anti-Scott Walker agenda, is that they're always saying that I don't deserve my salary and that I'm paid by the state. But what they don't realize is that's my 9-month salary. That's my 9-month salary.
Yes.
I have 3 months where I'm completely off. Unless I decide to take summer money, I have 3 months that aren't included. I can do whatever I want. And I'm saying this out loud because I actually do feel, I could retire if I was, I'm fine. But, it really is a wonderful thing to have a 3 months off in the summer.
Yeah, but the thing that has got my attention, Ann, is all this money that you're making during those 3 months through your activities online. And what I'm thinking to myself, frankly, is that the rate of compensation here at bloggingheads.tv is, it's just not that high, you know what I'm saying? So I've got to learn your secret somehow, I've got to get in on this payday thing that during these 3 months when we're not being paid by our respective universities.
You know what the most lucrative part of blogging is?
Tell me about
it. Amazon Associates. If people care enough about you to use your Amazon portal or your Amazon links to go into Amazon when they buy things.
And then Amazon kicks back?
What?
Amazon gives you some kind of compensation based on people who link to them through your site?
If they enter Amazon through my links and then they buy something, I get about 7% of the purchase price.
You get 7%. Wow.
So if someone buys, if someone buys something for $100, I get $7.
Got it.
If someone buys something for $1,000, I get $70.
No, I understand. I can do the 7% calculation.
Oh yeah, I know you can do the math. I'm just saying,
No, it's a high number, is what I'm saying.
It's good. That's actually. And that's good for everybody. It's good for Amazon. I guess it's not good for local business. It's good for Amazon.
No, I see that.
Amazon that's why they have the deal. People who would like to support me but don't want to just give me money. Although sometimes people use my PayPal button and they'll just give me $100 or $50.
Because they like what you wrote in a blog, they just send you money.
They just send me money. I'm waiting for someone who really loves me so much that they're just going to give me $1 million. Where's that, reader? Doesn't anyone love me that much? I'm waiting for that.
Well,
people have given me $100 many times.
My
goodness.
Just
as encouragement.
I see.
And then I email them back and I say thanks for the encouragement. But the biggest income comes from Amazon Associates, and then there are also ads. That's the other thing.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, during my 3 months, and unfortunately, I will not be getting 7% of all of the traffic that will be coming through any website that I have anything to do with. Rather, I'm going to go to Asia. You're
going to Kathmandu.
I'm going to Kathmandu in Nepal in July to a conference on affirmative action, of all things.
Now, why is there a conference on affirmative action in Kathmandu?
Well, because there's a political transition that's been ongoing in Nepal, moving away from the Hindu monarchy of old to a constitutional democracy, and they're writing a constitution. They're located there in the Indian subcontinent, in an area where the Hindu population and the caste system has left a legacy of social inequality. And like their neighbor, their giant neighbor, India, they're contemplating the introduction of various kinds of affirmative action practices for universities and for public employment in order to equalize or level the playing field or rectify the inegalitarian consequences of a history of caste inequality. But unlike their giant neighbor, India, they don't want to set that system up in such a way that it generates, detrimental political and resource allocation side effects, that it ends up with, one of the problems that they have in India, and I'm describing a complicated matter in very short compass, is that while the original development of positive discrimination and affirmative action programs in India, written into the Indian Constitution after independence, was aimed at helping the so-called untouchable lowest caste population in the country, who were under 20% of the population. The kind of politics of affirmative action has had a kind of creeping boundary in which so-called other backward castes, or an intermediate caste between the highest, most esteemed level and the untouchable level, were also able effectively to get themselves included within the protective umbrella of affirmative action. And so you now
set up a system, people are going to try to figure out how to win in it. Whatever the system is, people will try to win. They're not going to just step back and let other people win. So
the Nepalese want to try to avoid creating a system that will lead to the same kind of ill effects. And they've got, with the help of some academics, a group of experts on affirmative action who know necessarily nothing about Nepal, but who do know about affirmative action, to come in and talk with them about that. That's what this conference is about. Anyway,
yeah.
I'm doing that. And that's exciting. I'm also going to South Korea for the first time this summer. So I am enjoying the leisure of the theory class, but at the cost of not getting 7% of everybody who buys at Amazon.com linking through my site.
But it doesn't sound that leisurely. It sounds like a lot of work. I mean, I don't really like to travel on these professional things. I mean, there are different kinds of teaching in Germany sort of deals that go on that I see other people do, and I think, if I want to travel, I'll travel. This is, you have to do a lot of work. You're really on the spot. You have to perform. It's not easy. Traveling to do something scholarly, I know that there are these perks attached to it, but I'm just not one of the people that really enjoy that.
I'm of two minds about
It's a lot of work.
I mean, on the one hand, this 12-hour layover that I'm going to have in New Delhi as I transit, as I await the short flight to take me up to Nepal, is not something I'm looking forward to. It's going to kill me. I'm just hoping that there's a business class lounge in the New Delhi airport that has Wi-Fi, and I'm not going to bet my life on that. On the other hand, the Himalayas? Are you kidding? I mean, the world has gotten to be such a small place, and there's much of it I've not seen. I'm not as young as I used to be, and I really relish the prospect of being able to see something.
Well, you know what I like to do? Have you ever just traveled around in the United States, like done big road trips out west? I'm kind of the person that I don't really like to deal with the planes, and you talk about a 12-hour layover, but it could turn out to be a multi-day layover. You're lucky if it's only as much of a layover as is originally planned. I like to just throw the stuff in the car very spontaneously and declare a road trip and head out west. And in fact, I just saw in the news today that there's going to be an annular solar eclipse, and there's like a band that's out west that you can get into that includes some of the really best of the national parks. Like, we were thinking of just jumping in the car. You got to get there by Sunday. And anyway,
jumping in the car and driving to Idaho or someplace from Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah, well, it's a little further south. It would be, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah.
Oh, I see. South.
That's beautiful out there.
Oh,
so drive out, go down through Colorado. I mean, I like to do that. I mean, we have mountains too in the United States too. So why?
Do you own an RV, or would you rent one, or would you stay in motels by the roadside? How would you do it?
I would stay in motels.
Yeah.
But we have an SUV that has like a tent component to it, and we could. I'm not really much of a
camper.
My husband is, but I can't really do much of that. But it's the United States. There are motels all along the road. You can find, and with the iPhone and the iPad now, when you're traveling along, you actually can plan ahead and find a decent motel on the way.
Well,
they're all over the place. It's the United States, but you feel kind of anyway. But my question to you is: you go to these exotic places, you go see the Himalayas. Have you gone to all the national parks out west and all of the American things?
I have not. I have been in Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Grand Canyon, whatnot. I've never been in Grand Teton. I've never been in Yosemite. There's much of the beauty of the country in the West that I have not seen, and it's a fair point. I mean, and I guess the only way really to get that.
You can avoid those TSA agents feeling you up, taking off all the It's disgusting.
Yeah, but I have to pay $4 a gallon for gasoline on the road, and eat bad meals in diners and sleep on uncomfortable beds.
Road food. Oh, but that's American pop culture. The road driving through little towns and figuring out what will be the kind of classic road food in that place, and using the iPhone, you can actually figure it out. What's the barbecue place here, or what do they eat here? You can, if you can find that place in some obscure town, it's you feel it's a triumph.
I can
and if
see
all else
that.
fails, there's always the usual fast food. There's a floor below which you're not going to sink unless you go to some place really funky, which is to me, I would say, bloggable.
There is biking around the south of France and finding that country restaurant that has got like 6 couples sitting in it serving this magnificent 6-course French meal at whatever, and you feel triumphant. And then there's also driving around the Midwest of the United States into a small town and finding that diner with the meatloaf and mashed potatoes that's just got that wonderful roadside, Americana kind of flavor to it. Somehow, I don't rate those on the same level. Somehow discovering the bistro in Paris, or the country restaurant or whatever, seems to me like more of an adventure, and that may just say something about me.
Well, this is another advantage of having a blog, because I have my camera. When I travel, I take pictures of things, and the things that are like really essential Americana, even things that are sort of bad, make great photographs, make a great blog post. So I'm always connected to, writing about it, photographing it, things like that. Not that I couldn't do that on a bike trip in the south of France. I would love to do that. I mean, I have the little bit of a problem that I'm married to someone who has never left the country.
Oh, wow.
I mean, and doesn't want to leave.
Your husband has never left the country.
Right.
Does he have a passport?
No. Well, no.
Well, what would you do with the passport?
And mine is expired.
Well, I mean, is the not leaving like a matter of principle? I mean, or just that the opportunity didn't present itself?
Just not wanting to. I mean, I have enough trouble leaving home. And now I'm married to someone, and we feel the same way. We love it at home, and we live in an area where we can just get out for the day and get to, beautiful state parks, lakes. We can walk just a mile, and less than a mile, and we'll be at a beautiful lake, Lake Mendota here in Madison. So we enjoy the home base and being here. We're most comfortable here. Anytime we do throw ourselves out of the house and go somewhere, within a few days we're like, we wish we were back home, that we love home. I mean, home is great. Home is great. People complain about, we can't afford to go on a vacation this year, we'll have to do a staycation. I mean, to me, what's greater than a staycation? What's greater than vacation at home? Yeah, I didn't make that up.
First time I heard that.
Staycation. But it's seen as, isn't it sad? The economy is so bad, people can't afford to go on vacation. This idea that you have to go on vacation, you have to leave home. I mean, I think, and you always hear that travel is the thing that, if I could retire, I would travel. The best thing to do if you have some extra money is to throw it away on traveling. And I think not enough people are in touch with their inner homebody and their desire to be at home and their love for home. This idea that everyone's supposed to love travel and you're always supposed to be, and you hemorrhage money when you travel. You have to throw yourself out of the house. You leave home. In the old days, people didn't just go off traveling. People wanted to be home. People would travel when they had to run away from, some marauders or in search of food. But
okay, we're going to have to talk again. Excuse me. I'm recommending that we have a chat sometime in late August or whatever. We review where we quote unquote traveled in the summer, and you can compare your staycation to my vacation, and we'll see. Enjoy talking with you, Anne.
Okay.
So take care.
Okay. You too.
Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye.